Ever get that that feeling like you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg?
Mm,
That's kind of how I feel about traumatic brain injury, TBI.
right.
We often focus so much on the physical injuries, the stuff you can actually see.
Yeah,
But what about what lies beneath the surface?
exactly.
The hidden struggles, the behavioral and emotional challenges? That's what we're diving into today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to help us navigate these waters, we have this, well, I'll be honest, this incredibly insightful document all about identifying those often overlooked behavioral issues that can pop up after a TBI.
Yeah, and it's so important that we talk about this because, like you said, we often focus so much on the physical recovery. But the emotional and behavioral impact, well, that can be just as big of a deal,
Mm. Absolutely, it's huge. It's like stepping into, like you said, a whole new landscape of challenges, not just for the individual, but for everyone around them.
100%.
And this document, it doesn't sugarcoat anything. It throws us right into the deep end with this term. And honestly, I had to look it up. Emotional dysregulation.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds a little intimidating. Can you break it down for us? What does that actually mean for someone who's experienced a TBI?
Well, imagine this. Okay. Imagine your emotions are like a roller coaster. But this roller coaster's lost its brakes.
Oh, okay.
1 minute you're up, feeling fine. The next you're plummeting down, overwhelmed by anger, sadness, whatever it might be. And it's like it comes out of nowhere.
Wow. So we're not just talking about feeling a little, more emotional than usual. This is like this unpredictable, intense wave of emotions, almost impossible to control.
Exactly. And that's the key here, that lack of control. And it all goes back to the injury itself, to the impact on the brain.
So how does TBI actually lead to this difficulty in regulating emotions?
Well, there are areas in the brain that basically act like control centers for our emotions and impulses. And those often take a hit after a TBI.
So someone might seem like they're overreacting, but it's really their brain struggling to process and manage those emotions effectively.
Right. It's a physical thing, not a choice. But then, and this is interesting, you have people who experience the opposite, something called flat effect.
Flat effect.
Yeah, so it might seem like they're just not interested, like they don't care. But it's actually the brain, again, struggling to process those emotions after the injury.
So it's like their emotional responses are turned way down, which again could be easily misinterpreted.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to view all of this, these behavioral changes, through a neurological lens. We can't judge the person. We have to understand how the brain is responding to this trauma.
It's about separating the person from the symptoms, which I love how this document puts it, talking about impulsivity as the brain's brakes being faulty.
I love that analogy.
Me too. It's so true. But can you unpack that a bit? What does that actually look like for someone in their everyday life after a TBI?
So picture this. Your brain is like a car,
Hmm.
right? Navigating a busy street.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And after a TBI, especially if those frontal lobes are involved, the brakes, the ones that help us pause, think things through before we act, well, they can get a bit wonky.
Wonky brakes.
Exactly. And that leads to these snap judgments, risky behavior, maybe saying things they wouldn't normally say.
So it's more than just being a little impulsive. It's like a fundamental shift in how the brain processes information, how it makes decisions.
Exactly. And the document gives this example, and I think it's something we can all relate to. It talks about the impact on our social filters.
Oh, tell me you haven't had one of those "did I really just say that out loud" moments.
Oh, all the time.
But for someone with a TBI, these social missteps, they can happen more often, right?
Right, and they might seem completely out of character.
Because that filter, that little voice that says, maybe don't say that, is, well, it's not working quite right.
Exactly. Those impulses, they kind of just power through.
Leading to some, let's just say, interesting interactions.
You could say that.
Wow.
But, the important thing here is that, again, these behaviors, they're a direct result of the injury, not the person.
So important to remember that it's not about intention or character, it's the injury.
And I think that's why education and awareness, why we're even having this conversation, it's so crucial. The more we understand about TBI and what's really going on in the brain, the better we can respond with compassion and support, not judgment.
Absolutely. So speaking of challenging behaviors, there's another big one this document tackles, and it's a tough one to talk about. Aggression.
Yeah, definitely a sensitive topic.
So how do we even begin to unpack that, the idea of aggression in the context of TBI?
Well, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that we tend to associate aggression with a conscious choice, a deliberate attempt to cause harm.
Right, like it's intentional.
Exactly. But
Mhm.
after a TBI, even small frustrations, things that wouldn't have fazed them before, They can trigger this anger, this aggression, and it's not coming from that same place.
So again, we have to go back to the brain, to the physical changes.
Yes.
So you're saying that this type of aggression, it's less about intention and more about the brain's response to damage and, like we talked about earlier, dysregulation.
Exactly. Now, it's not about condoning aggressive behavior at all, but we have to understand where it's coming from. This isn't malice. This is a brain that's struggling.
So for someone with TBI, their reaction, it might seem way out of proportion to whatever's happening, but it's their brain, it's how they're wired after the injury.
It's like, how did you put it earlier? Like a misfiring of wires.
Yeah, like a reflex.
Exactly, not a conscious choice. And the thing is, this aggression, it can show up right after the injury or even years down the line.
You're listening to The Deep Dive, and we're going deep into the often hidden world of behavioral and emotional challenges after TBI. Stay tuned. We'll be back after a quick break.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Now, before the break, we were talking about how TBI, it can really show up in some unexpected ways, like with emotional dysregulation, even aggression.
Right.
And now we're going to dive into another challenge, one that I think is often really misunderstood, apathy.
It's so easy, I think, to kind of jump to conclusions, write someone off as just, oh, they're just not motivated. But this document, it really emphasizes that, well, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, apathy after a TBI, it's not just about a lack of enthusiasm. It's not that simple.
Right.
We have to remember how important those frontal lobes are.
Frontal lobes, right.
They're the ones that drive our ability to start tasks, plan things out, stay motivated. And when those get injured, well, even the simplest things can feel impossible.
So it's not that someone doesn't want to do something, it's that the injury itself is making it harder, physically harder, for them to plan, to get started, to follow through.
Exactly. And this document, it actually uses a really powerful analogy here. It's like, imagine trying to drive a car, but your steering wheel is broken. That's what this can feel like. That's what impaired executive function, which is really common after a TBI, can feel like.
Wow. So you might have all the right intentions, you want to do these things, but to actually make it happen, to put those intentions into action, it's so much harder.
Exactly. It's like you're stuck.
And that feeling of being stuck, of wanting to move forward, but not having like the tools to do it, that's got to be incredibly frustrating.
Oh, absolutely. For the individual and for their families, it can be so, so difficult. And that's why patience and understanding, it's so important from everyone.
Yeah.
Instead of, assuming someone is just being lazy, we need to be asking, okay, what kind of support can we offer? How can we help them navigate these challenges?
Right. It's about focusing on abilities, not disabilities, because everyone's recovery is going to look different. But this brings us to, I think, what might be one of the most challenging aspects of TBI, both for the individual and for, for their loved ones: lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And the document uses this term, I'm trying to say it right, anosognosia.
Yeah, anosognosia. It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is, but it's such an important concept to understand. So in the context of TBI, what does that actually mean?
Basically, someone with anosognosia, they might be completely unaware of the changes that have happened to them, the changes in their behavior,
Yeah.
even when it's really obvious to everyone else.
So it's almost like looking in a mirror but not recognizing your own reflection. That disconnect, to go through something so traumatic and not even realize how you've changed, that's got to be so disorienting.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it can lead to, well, you can imagine misunderstandings, frustration, arguments. Someone with anosognosia might insist they're totally fine, that nothing's different, even when they're struggling with, their emotions, their impulses, just everyday life.
And for their family, for their friends, it's heartbreaking, right? They see these struggles, they see how different things are, but their loved one doesn't.
Exactly. And it can be hard to know what to do in those situations, which is why, if you're seeing these signs, it's so important to reach out for help.
From a professional, right? Someone who really understands TBI and anosognosia.
Right, because they can work with not just the individual, but with their family, too, to come up with coping mechanisms, to figure out how to move forward.
So it's not about, forcing that awareness, which I imagine could backfire.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. It's more about gently guiding them towards a more, realistic understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, it's such a delicate balance.
It is, and it takes time, patience, and a whole lot of support.
Absolutely. But at the end of the day, anosognosia, it's not a choice, it's a symptom of the injury.
Right.
Which brings us back to, I think, the overarching message of this entire document.
Right.
We need to approach TBI and those who've experienced it with empathy and compassion.
100%.
Recovery, it's not linear.
Nope.
There's going to be ups and downs, setbacks, victories.
It's a journey.
But with patience, with understanding, with the right kind of support, people with TBI, they can and they do live full and meaningful lives.
Absolutely. We'll be back with more insights from the deep dive after this short break.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've really covered some ground today.
We have.
It's like, I don't know, we thought we were just looking at the tip of the iceberg with TBI, but it's like this whole other world has opened up, hasn't it?
It really has. And you know what's been so eye-opening for me going through this document is how much it emphasizes the brain itself.
Right. It always comes back to the brain.
It does. Because it's so easy to look at these behavioral and emotional changes and just assume, oh, that person's just being difficult.
Right. Or they're just not trying. Like it's a choice.
Exactly. But when you understand the neurological underpinnings, when you see it all through that lens, well, it changes everything.
It does. And that's why I think, for me at least, the biggest takeaway from all of this is just how powerful awareness and education really are.
100%.
It's not just about, memorizing definitions or being able to rattle off symptoms. It's about really getting it, understanding what it's actually like for the person with TBI, for their families. It's about empathy, really.
It is. And I think that's where this document is so powerful because it doesn't shy away from how hard it can be, all these challenges, but it also, and this is crucial, it offers hope.
It does. It reminds us that even though these challenges are very real, they're not insurmountable.
Exactly. And that's why early identification is so important.
Absolutely. And the document, it emphasizes that again and again, because the sooner we can recognize these behavioral and emotional shifts, well, the sooner someone can get the support they need.
Exactly, because that support, it can make all the difference.
It really can.
Whether it's therapy, medication, even just having a network of people around them who get it, who understand. That kind of support can empower someone to start taking back control of their lives.
It's about shifting that whole perspective, isn't it? From judgment to understanding, from blame to support.
Beautifully said. And if our listeners take away one thing from this whole conversation, from this deep dive, I hope it's that, to approach TBI and those who are living with it with grace and compassion.
Because recovery, it's not a straight line. It's not a checklist. There will be setbacks. There will be those good days and bad days.
Absolutely.
But with patience, understanding, and the right support, people with TBI, they can live full and meaningful lives.
They absolutely can. And for anyone out there listening, anyone who might be struggling with these challenges, please know that you are not alone. There are resources out there. There are people who understand.
Yes. Don't be afraid to reach out, to connect with others, to seek out the support you deserve. Because knowledge is power, right? The more we know about TBI, the better equipped we are, not just to help ourselves, but to advocate for others.
Exactly. So keep asking those questions, keep learning, and keep those conversations going. Because sometimes, honestly, that's all it takes to make a world of difference.
So well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the often invisible world of TBI. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.